In favour? Any opposed? So we'll move to item 12. Got Rebecca and Elsa. Thank you very much. I know we're going to slightly abbreviate some of the the great work you've been doing.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. We'll just wait for the slides to come up, thank you. But while we're waiting for the slides to come up, I'll introduce myself. So kia ora koutou, ko Bex Greaves toka ingoa. Ilza Gotali and I are co-leading the Auckland Group submission on the Going for Housing Growth proposal put out by the government. So what we're going to talk to you today about briefly, because I'm sure that it's been a long and busy day for everybody around the table, is just to talk about the government's proposed urban development options for the new planning system. And just to highlight that what we're talking about is not about making changes to the current system, the things that we're currently working with, but what's coming next. So for quite some time now, you've had different council officers come and report to you about the government's broader resource management reform program, and everything you can see there on the slide in green is what's already been ticked off by the government in terms of phase 1 and phase 2. And what we're here to talk to you about today is the last action in phase 2. And it's a bit of a segue because it's looking forward to the future in terms of what happens when the government gets to the last part of its resource management reform program, when it looks to repeal the Resource Management Act and introduce new legislation. So the urban development options that are in the paper and discussed in your submission are all about that forward-looking phase. Now, there have been a lot of government announcements since the middle of last year about what Going for Housing Growth is all about, and what's in that discussion document is really just a small portion of that broader program. So it's really looking just at the urban development options. So nothing about financing tools and nothing about the natural environment. So it's really just focusing on Pillar 1. And in a minute, we'll talk about some baselines or principles that are included in that discussion document. So in the government's discussion paper, they've got about 40 different urban development options as to what the new legislation might look like. And that's a lot of different information, and so to synthesise the material, we've used 6 different themes in the committee report and in this overview to break it down and to really look at what those potential options might mean for the Auckland Council Group and for Aucklanders. Now, in your report, in your agenda, and also on these slides, you might see quite a bit of red. We've used a traffic light system to indicate the indicative feedback we've put in the draft submission. And the reason why we've done that is just to highlight, some key messages, but also it's just a discussion document, so there's not a lot of detail. It's not like a bill where you get a regulatory impact statement and a whole lot of extra oomph to better understand exactly what's being proposed. So what we're doing is we're flagging all the potential issues and just making sure that we're across those and we can share with the government our feedback on those options to make them as pragmatic and workable in the future as the government moves through to that new system. And in particular, we've made a real focus on suggesting alternatives and improvements, which aligns with the work that the Auckland Council Group does, but also aligns with the common goals that we have with the government.
And yeah, I just want to, just in case, because I've heard in conversation before, just be very clear, this is not to do with the current plan change that we are working on at the moment. This is over and above, it's in the future, there isn't legislation, this is about building on the next piece of legislation that'll come and then probably have to do more plan changes. But just be really clear, the stuff we're doing on Plan Change 78 replacement is not this. Anyway, I'll let you continue, Bex, but I could hear a few murmurings.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're just going to whip through those 6 key themes and how we've grouped the different options. So the first one is not actually a particular option on which feedback has been sought, but they're important matters that we wanted to highlight for your attention. And because these are underlying principles that will really flow through and shape what the new legislation looks like, it's worth, I think, to consider what they mean. So what the paper does is it sets out these principles for the future planning system, and it says in the future the planning system will be a lot narrower, that there won't be such a broad consideration of different kinds of effects, and that effects will only be considered once they're at a higher threshold or a higher level. And there's also going to be a focus just on externalities only. Another key idea is that there's going to be greater centralisation. So we've already seen a little bit of that in terms of national planning standards, but it's really going to be a much more centralised and centrally driven system with less autonomy for local councils in devising their own policies and plans, and a lot of greater standardisation. So not just saying, here are your zoning rules, but also directing where we might apply them and where we might apply particular zones. So a lot of stuff coming from the centre and not a lot of autonomy for local councils. So those baselines could create some efficiencies with having streamlining across the motu, but we are concerned that there could be unintended consequences and outcomes, because with that degree of centralisation and standardisation, there's no, or likely to be little ability to have place-based responses. And Auckland is quite a different place to, say, Gore or Hokitika, or even of some other larger cities around the country. But this system has to work for Auckland. And I just wanted to highlight one more thing. I know I meant to be going a bit quickly, but I think it's a really key point. So I just want to say that we're concerned that there is inadequate provision for Māori in the new system. So in the discussion paper, there's no acknowledgement of the role of Māori in terms of setting up the new system or how Māori might participate within that system. So that's a key weakness, and clearly the government needs to do a lot more work in that regard.
Thanks. So the second theme is around spatial planning and infrastructure. So a key part of the new system is the requirement for councils to develop a regional spatial plan that is forward-looking for at least 30 years. And the intention is the spatial plan will replace the future development strategy. We strongly support the requirement for a spatial plan and its integration within the resource management system, so that there's a clear link between the spatial plan and the regulatory plan, i.e. the unitary plan. To be effective, we'd really like to ensure that the spatial plans allow for the integration of land use and infrastructure planning, the ability to sequence in time the release of land, and the ability to signal potentially no development areas, particularly if there's a prohibition on the use of a rural-urban boundary, and we'll talk to that in a minute. A key question in this area for us is the scope of the plan, whether it's a very narrow scope focused on urban development and infrastructure, or whether there'll be the ability to address the wider scope of community outcomes, i.e. those that we have identified in the Auckland plan.
Sorry, you can keep going.
Yeah, okay, great. The third theme is housing growth and development capacity. Now here the main proposal is to incorporate the use of housing growth targets. Now under the NPSUD existing, we are a Tier 1 council and we are already subject to housing targets. So the two key points that we'd like to draw out in the proposal is, one, the government is proposing that councils are required to use high growth population forecasts plus a 20% contingency. Now, we currently use a medium growth forecast, and there's also some proposed changes in the methodology for calculating development capacity. So we obviously recommend accepting housing growth targets as we already have them, but we do recommend opposing the mandatory use of high growth projections, and instead recommend that councils have the ability to use the growth forecast scenario that is most likely for that council. We also have some concerns about the implications for infrastructure planning and the potential two-track forecast system, and some questions about the methodology, and we've set these out in our submission.
Thank you, Ilza. Now, the government considers that removing planning barriers will assist with the land supply and also with housing affordability. And we're just going to talk quickly about the RUB, or the rural-urban boundary. And our recommended position in the submission is that the RUB isn't a genuine planning barrier, and we should be able to retain it or something like it in the new system. So although it's a key tool for signalling where the council intends to provide infrastructure and also for signalling where development is intended, it does other things as well, which are also really important. So as well as working in conjunction with zoning to send signals to the market about where development is a great idea, it does other things too, like I said. So it highlights those significant constraint areas, like say at Okura, like above the marine reserve and the Waitakere Ranges, for example. And the other thing it does is identify those places that are subject to significant natural hazards. So we don't want to see the ability to have such a tool removed. Another idea is to remove planning rules to enable a greater mix of different land use activities, and we agree with this. We already do this somewhat in the Auckland Unitary Plan, and there's definitely the ability to do a little more. It's just around having the right mix of activities and at the right scale. So, for example, having small-scale commercial activities is great, providing for supermarkets and the effects and nuisance it would have on residential communities is another thing altogether. And the other thing is that we want to protect our significant investment in public transport and the support of centres, so we don't want to see widespread commercial activity that completely undermine the functioning of centres and where agglomeration benefits can best be accrued. So it's about being proportionate and having a sensible response overall. Moving to intensification, and thank you for your comments before, Mr. Chairman, that these intensification requirements are not about changing the national policy statement on urban development now. Originally, that was the government's idea, but they've pulled back from that and they're saying, no, these are all ideas for the future system. And they would be additional to what we're already doing under Plan Change 78 and what we must continue doing there. So there's a lot of red on this slide, which might be a little bit alarming, but what we're suggesting is that we oppose these options in their current form, but you'll see with all the ticks, we have suggested a whole lot of alternatives and improvements to help achieve the government's goals, but also to align with the work that the council has already done and our existing strategic documents. So our one idea is around having intensification along corridors, and we agree with that. It's a good idea. We already have that in our regional policy statement. We already provide for intensification along certain corridors under the Auckland Unitary Plan, but what we're suggesting is how they do it and the methods that they've proposed are not great and that they cause a whole lot of problems. And this idea has come from the fact that only Auckland and Wellington have a rapid transit network, and so they're trying to increase intensification in those other cities. But the discussion paper doesn't talk about, well, what happens in Auckland and Wellington where we already do provide intensification around the busways and stations and our heavy rail stations.
Okay, and the last theme is around responsiveness. Now, a key focus of the government's proposals is really to create a planning regime that is more responsive to the market. And there are two aspects to this. First, the government is proposing to provide what they've termed an agile land release mechanism, and the premise here is that rather than having to go through a plan change process to release land, or the idea is that having to go through a plan change process is a barrier to a competitive land market. So one of the ideas that's been floated around is that a land could be zoned as indicative urban with an infrastructure trigger, and once that infrastructure has been delivered, there would be some form of administrative process to essentially activate the zoning. And this approach is used in some jurisdictions and has merit. However, it is difficult to see how it would work effectively in a very complex urban environment such as Auckland. Unfortunately, the discussion document doesn't give enough information for us to really comment more, but we have in our submission made a set of recommendations to see how it could be potentially work better in practice. The second element to that is the government wants councils to be more responsive to unanticipated and out-of-sequence growth. And of course, we are concerned that this undermines a well-planned urban form that integrates growth and infrastructure development. And we are recommending that council impose additional requirements for councils to adopt their proposals for land development that are over and above the 30-year supply, as it makes it impossible to plan for growth. And finally, last point on this is the discussion paper does recognize that infrastructure is a limitation and that growth needs to pay for growth. New funding and financing tools are being developed separately. For example, replacing development contributions with development levies. Here we do strongly support and recommend that these new funding tools are clearly integrated and linked with the new resource management system in order to enable managing growth.
Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly talk about the local board feedback that we've received so far. So we've had a really strong level of support and interest from local boards, with 18 of the 21 making comments on the draft proposals in the discussion document. And they've largely been very consistent. And you can see there on the slide what some of those themes were. And also available to you in Nexus is a compilation of feedback from all the boards, all 18 of them. And they're generally very, very consistent. So in terms of other final steps, the draft submission has been written and it's with you in the agenda. We're making some final changes and tweaks to reflect some of that local board feedback, but it's otherwise near complete. We're looking to finalise the submission, and it must be lodged by midnight on Sunday, although I hope not to be working on it right until that time. And following on from that, the officials will receive feedback from Auckland Council and other interested parties, and we're hopeful that useful feedback like ours will help shape and refine those options. And legislation will be introduced, draft legislation will be introduced to the House towards the end of the year, and the government's goal is to enact all of this by the middle of next year. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our quick overview, and so we're in your hands in terms of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think probably because I didn't get heap of time before this meeting to really look at the presentation and stuff, just, the reds look scary, but the reds are actually, here's our idea. This isn't legislation, it's not locked in. We're trying to give our feedback that Auckland is different. This is also going to be on top of the 2 million odd capacity we're putting through in the new plan change. This is also kind of not in line with our future development strategy, the RUB, the infrastructure. We still don't know how we're going to fund the infrastructure. We don't know if infrastructure levies are coming. So this is why we're in this kind of awkward space of giving quite broad feedback of what the legislation might look like, to try and give some context, because I know that everyone's a little bit confused on where we are, where we have been, where we're going. Anyway, Mayor Wayne Brown.
Okay, I get kind of where you're going, but I think that the use of colour in here is unhelpful to the extent that these are discoverable, and it looks really a lot more negative than what you're saying. And so, for instance, I look at 4 and 5. 5, you've got everything red, and yet a lot of those things we kind of agree on. So I would have put that as orange, because you're just pissing them off. We are in a situation where we're having to do a negotiation with the government, a government who are quite happy to just stand on our hands and just say this is what we're going to do. So a red thing with a little few ticks, and that means that when you run red, which is really red because you're pissed off, you've used it up for things which aren't. Like if you come back to prevent rural urban boundaries in a plan, well, I think we are a bit annoyed about that. We don't want them to tell us we're not going to decide how far we're going to go. So I would have left that at red. And for instance, enable greater mix of land uses and zones is something I thought we would have been absolutely green about, because we're encouraging people to put a mixture in. We're saying to developers, if you're going to develop somewhere a little bit further away, put a third of it aside for jobs creating things. So and so I think that I would like you to reconsider this, burn these, and go down with something or other which has got a few more oranges.
Yeah, to be clear, and I've spoken to me.
I admit that it's not going with you in this thing, and you're doing a whole lot of written stuff, but things arrive on people's pages, and these guys have got a lot to read, and not everybody in this room reads everything, and I'm pretty sure that they find it hard to read everything. And so this will show up and they'll say, bloody hell, look at this, they expose everything. We try and talk to them and look at that. We will talk about all this.
Just to clarify, Mayor, and I have spoken to Megan about this too, that is not, the attachment A and B all the little areas, it looks far friendlier. It's the submission.
I
The submission.
get that.
Yeah.
But once you publish it,
we're not sending that. That is for us.
I know, but I think we should actually redo that again in a more present way, and so that when it's accidentally discovered, because they won't read all that stuff. All this stuff is very cleverly done. It's all being sent around the country on Saturday night. Do you seriously think the minister's going to read all of that by next week? No. He will look at these things. And so I get what you're saying, but I think this is dangerous and needs to be reset, because this is how, in real life, how things happen. People just see what they can see and they make decisions quickly. And so I just want you to think about that. Please think about that. Okay, that's my bit. But I do get what you're trying to do. But
Yeah. I think,
the minister's the minister. He's a human being.
to be fair on staff, I think because it is so complex, they were trying to make it easy for us to present it at committee, because they probably knew we were going to be end of a long day. And if they'd just presented the extremely complex submission, we would have gone, well, are we for or against it? And so, yeah, so we're stuck in a bit of a bind. That's not going anywhere. Obviously, it's now public.
Well, let's do an orange one and make it go somewhere.
I know.
Okay.
But I will work with you guys and work with Megan to get, I don't know how we'll get it, but before this Sunday, right? So tomorrow, Mayor, I will sit down, we will sit down together and make sure it looks friendlier. If you read the actual attachments, it is very clear. It goes through. We're not opposed to this. We're doing this already. But here's some ideas on how to make it better. Here's some ideas on how Auckland's different, etc. But I think we've got caught up on the presentation, which is not the submission. Yeah. Right, Councillor Dalton.
Actually, it was a comment, so I'll wait.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Darby.
It's a long day. I was going to say maybe we should issue the staff with some Faber-Castell coloured pencils, 48 in the pack, and you go to it. But I'll come back to being serious now. Okay, sorry. Just in terms of the, now I've lost the page. I'm just going to find it. Bear with me. The high growth scenario that is being recommended, plus a 20% contingency. What is that based on? Where else in government do they model that way? Is that something that's come out of Treasury? Would government use high growth plus 20% when it's planning for health or planning for education? Is there any evidence of that?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I think this is framed as trying to, in the minister's words, flood the market with land, and so is trying to encourage increased capacity. So it is high growth plus 20%. He's rather than, I guess you can go under and overs, and they're concerned that we're under allocating or under enabling land supply, so they would like to push the envelope to the other side. So I think that's to the other extreme. So I think that's the motivation. But they have acknowledged that infrastructure could be planned to a different projection, and that's where we have a little bit of concern that it could result in sort of a dual track of using one set of numbers for land enablement and one set of numbers for infrastructure planning.
So they're basically saying create greater opportunity to this extent, but then they're saying when you come to infrastructure, you can undercook it, right? And so we would expect that they'd be undercooking their infrastructure as well, be it education, health, and there's no evidence, there's no evidence to date that we do not have enough capacity. Is that correct?
So I think the The challenges that we're trying to also articulate is the limitation really does start to come down to infrastructure. So it is plan enabled. I think we do very well, and we've had lots of those conversations throughout the other plan changes. It is really where you start to limit it by how much infrastructure we have, and that's where the rubber hits the road. So in terms of plan enabled, yes, we do.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, we're all losing our minds now. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I confess it's a really difficult time of day to be undecided about a vote, but that's where I am, and I'm struggling in my limited mental capacity to try and figure this all out and figure out what I think about it. Where's the question? Right, so the high growth population projection, I'm a bit confused as to why we have a concern about that given Auckland's history. We always beat projections. So what's the deal with that?
Our position is we are requesting that it's not mandatory to use it. We're saying council should be able to use the projection that makes most sense for them. So it doesn't say that we won't use the high growth if that is appropriate for us, but we're concerned about it being mandatory.
I've been around here long enough to know how council use those things when we have the option to. Around height enablement along key transport corridors, that's read in the presentation. Could you just explain a little bit more detail around why would we have a problem with what they're proposing? And I've seen reference in the submission to 200 metres. That seems pretty small, doesn't it?
Thank you for your question. Through you, Mr. Chairman. As I was mentioning during the presentation, doing intensification along key corridors is a great idea, and it's one that we are already fully behind. It's in our regional policy statement and in the Auckland Unitary Plan. The government's proposition is that the national policy statement on urban development is not great in terms of requiring walkable catchments because they only apply to Auckland and Wellington, and that there are other places that are well serviced by public transport, by buses, and that's the idea of the corridors, is that in all places where thresholds are met, and they're proposing that they're to be met through use of a New Zealand NZTA document to define how you identify the corridors. And they're saying do intensification in those places, and they're being quite prescriptive as to what that intensification response should be. So our response as staff is that we're recommending that, yes, intensification is a good idea, but again, be proportionate and be deliberate around what it is that you are proposing to do so that it works well as a system. So what they're proposing is 6-storey heights along particular corridors. That would mean 6-storey heights along nearly every bus route in Auckland if you apply the NZTA document to us. And what our advice is, yes, 6-storey height is a great idea in the right locations, but along a bus route, in some places you'll have little neighbourhood centres and local centres and town centres, but for a lot of the time you're just going to have bus stops and hopefully some medium density housing. But you're not going to have the same opportunities for economic activity and agglomeration like you do in centres. And the centres are the places where we most want intensification because of all the benefits that flow from them. So we're saying yes to intensification along corridors, just we don't like how you framed it up. And we suggest that we put our effort into centres and the areas around centres and some other locations too, but not in the way that the government is proposing in their options. Because a string of bus stops along a road mostly with houses in between is not operating in the same way as a centre where you've got so many more opportunities for growth and intensification and the benefits of people. Our investment in public transport that allow people to get to centres, do multi-purpose trips, you can go to the dentist and do your shopping and a whole lot of other things while you're there. You're not going to get that from going to stand at a bus stop.
I do appreciate that. Thanks for that answer. The bit that I'm not understanding there, are we talking about rapid transit bus stops, or are we talking about bus stops, like all bus stops?
Just a pole on the side of the road. And so that's our concern also, is that buses may well get caught up in general traffic, and so the idea about let's respond to this opportunity because there'll be so much more intensification and we'll get all these benefits, it's not true like it is for rapid transit, which operates on a dedicated network. It's highly reliable, it's highly frequent, and so that's why they're such good places around which we should be intensifying in what we are doing. Whereas if you've got a bus and it doesn't have a dedicated bus lane and it's getting caught up in traffic, then that's responding to an opportunity that's not actually genuine. And so that degree of response should be proportionate to that level of opportunity. So 6 stories in response to a pole on the side of the road where you can wait in the rain and your bus might be stuck behind a whole lot of other traffic is just not the same kind of opportunity as intensifying in centres and around the rapid transit stops on busways and heavy rail stations.
Sorry, maybe I'm not expressing myself properly. It's been a long day, but I don't care about the makeup of the stop physically itself, whether it's a pole or not, right? But are they defining it as rapid transit, and what do they define as rapid transit? A frequency of bus route, is that part of it?
So they're using the document that NZTA did for a different purpose, and that the document talks about having spine bus routes, and there's a collector bus route category as well, a secondary category. So the reason why I keep going on about the pole is I think it's a nice mental image because there's nothing else there. So it's just the side of the road. It's not like in a centre. So they're just suburban bus routes. It's just like a road. It's just a road with ordinary activities happening nearby.
But are they 10 minutes or less bus routes? That's what I'm talking.
I beg your pardon?
Is there a distinction between bus services that go 10 minutes or less and therefore rapid versus a bus that would go to Codylands every half an hour or every 45 minutes? That's the distinction I'm trying to drive at, if that makes sense?
No, thank you for your elaboration. The way that the NZTA document has been written is it would capture basically every bus route in Auckland, because the threshold is so low. So it's not rapid transit and it's not even frequent transit. It's just if a bus happens to go.
So our feedback is we agree with this, just not in every. We agree all our frequent, all our rapid. We're already doing 800 metres around bus stations, and we're already looking to corridors that have frequent buses. But we're saying the bus that comes every 2 hours, it shouldn't be that one. We can help make it work. Yeah, so we're saying we'll show you how, and we'll have way more corridors than other cities, but yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think you guys are saying the same thing, but the opposite way around, I think. This is why submission by committee is always very fun. Councillor Filipina.
Tēnā koe he mana. Tēnā kōrua, ladies. This item, it's here to allow us to build more homes. Am I correct in saying that?
That's the government's broader goal. The Going for Housing Growth is a big program, but that is one of the key goals about increasing land supply for more housing and increasing housing affordability. And they've got a whole raft of different options. Whether option A will lead to those outcomes remains to be seen, and so that's why we've suggested a range of different amendments to try and, for example, with the planning barriers question, to say, we think these are the actual barriers, and here are some ideas to address those and to help get the outcomes that you want. Because they're concerned, why aren't there enough 4 to 6 story buildings being constructed? And we've said it's for a whole range of things, because we need to make changes to the building code and for having acceptable solutions for 4 to 6 to unlock capacity in the construction sector, and because we think that there are problems with land assembly. Lots of our sites are really small, and so it's hard to build to that height because you need to be able to buy more pieces of land to have enough yield possible.
So it's enabling submission. That's what you're saying? Allowing us as council to enable us around the homes, everything else, land. Am I on the right track or I'm way off?
I think that you are broadly on the right track. What we're doing is we're saying thank you to the government for showing us the legislation that you're planning on writing soon and for sharing with us these different ideas to get to the goals that you want to get to about housing affordability and more housing supply. And we're providing feedback on the merits of those ideas.
Got it. And look, I just have to grab the opportunity, Chair, just to say that with your theme one under system design, I'm glad your second bullet point is focused on externalities. So, that's really good. And I think that also, if I go to number 4 as well, theme 4, planning barriers, and again, limit planning rules to externalities only. Example, no rules for balcony. So I think we're on the right track there. So I just wanted to sort of say that. Kia ora, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And whenever the legislation comes out, we will then submit on that too, because we will actually know and we can say, yeah, we support or we don't. But this is kind of us, we always say they come at us too quickly and now we're kind of grumpy they've come to us too early. Councillor Baker. Okay, cool.
Oh, sorry, I meant...
Any other? Oh, Member Wilcox. Thank you.
Yeah, look, firstly, just about the rapid transit thing. I was involved in the extension of the railway to Mandurah from Perth, and they did hubs around certain places, but that was before they actually put the infrastructure in, before the housing began. Has there been any corridor from the government regarding that, about extending the railway and then putting hubs in, or did NZTA just say we're just going to put houses here, there and everywhere?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, there hasn't been any signal about doing extra investment of state infrastructure, but what you're raising is a really good point, and it's something that the local board's commented on as well, and that's with the structure planning that will have to happen in the new system, is that we need really good implementation levers. It's not just the council or the council group infrastructure that we plan and sequence and deliver that's really important, that our communities need. It's the infrastructure that is also provided by the state. So, upgrades to rail, as you've just mentioned, but also upgrades to state highways and the provisions of schools. So it's not just about on the council to, help the planning system in the future, but also what levers exist to get good outcomes by the state too.
So my second question is, in the kaupapa, in the response to the questions, impacts of proposals on Māori, on page 42, and I know Tau did this, so I'm not going to step on toes, but having said that, I think we shortchange ourselves. Auckland is the largest Maori city in the world. And I think that's a point of difference that we need to kind of make. And so it's the only Māori city that's worth talking about. 20% of the people that sit around this table have Māori whakapapa. So I think it's important that we make that point of difference, and that it doesn't just impact, it impacts everybody, but it also impacts Māori. And none of us are going to be with our hands out for working for families. But unfortunately, Māori seem to be, especially in the largest city in New Zealand, Māori seem to be the ones that are affected mostly in the lower income streams and everything else. Secondly, MOE are going around doing a roadshow regarding housing for Maori land, and I think the question that I have is, I know this is a response to the housing strategy from the Crown or from the government. Did MOE talk about their process for dealing with Maori land, of which we have Maori land in Auckland, but unfortunately with the numbers it's not worth even talking about, as opposed to say somewhere like Far North District Council where there's quite a bit of Maori land, or East Coast, in Gisborne. So I'm just wondering about those two questions.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your questions. In terms of Māori land and looking at future urban development options, that has been covered to a small degree in terms of the work the government's already started under Phase 2 RMA reforms. And so the committee members may remember the submission work done on the proposed national environmental standard for papakainga housing and looking to enable papakainga on Māori land. But you're right that the amount of Māori land in Tamaki Makaurau is very small. In terms of these urban development proposals for the new system, it's completely silent about those kinds of opportunities. What officials have signalled is that the work that's been happening recently, like that proposed national environmental standard, is that the government intends to pick up all of that recent policy work and transfer it across and drop it into the new system. So we can expect that those ideas will flow across. But again, like this, we don't know what the detail will be. And to go to your first point, certainly we would be happy to make changes to the front part of the submission to reflect the what you mentioned at the start. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions, and I'm not going to jinx it by asking anyone else if they want one, so you better run. Thank you so much. Right, I think we had a mover in a second. Shane doesn't want to now. I hope to second. Oh, Andy Baker. Right. Right. Is there anyone who'd like to speak to this? Councillor Henderson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll try and be brief, but look, I'm feeling quite conflicted. I think I can find a way to support this because we're early in the process. We get down to legislation where the rubber meets the road, then I'll probably have a lot more to say about it. I think there are some elements of our submission that I don't agree with, frankly, and I think the words of the Mayor were really good on that front as well. 200 metres seems too small for me. I take on board the point around bus routes, and I think we've got to work hard with the government in terms of classifying those routes. Well, that was a really good point because we don't necessarily want to encourage huge intensification where there's sort of semi-rural areas that just happens to get a bus every hour or so. That seems perverse. But I don't want to be a part of a council, that restricts planning and restricts housing that is much needed, especially in the central suburbs and the isthmus areas where the housing is so needed in a housing crisis. We've got to encourage that as much as we can. And if people can live near bus routes and train stops and things like that, then it doesn't actually matter what amenities necessarily in terms of shops or whatever that they have around that house. That bit's not a concern for me. You can jump straight on the bus. Get to work, get to where you need to go quite quickly. A lot of us came here on the bus or on the train, so that for me is something that I would like us to really sharpen our pencil on and maybe look at, see if we can be a bit more bold about it. I want to shout out to the local boards, provide some great feedback in here, and I think the Waitakere Rangers local board really, that really resonated with me when they talked about things like the Donut City that I'm always talking about here, but how we've restricted development in places like Ponsonby and Herne Bay, St Mary's Bay, all these kind of places that are so close to jobs, so close to everything people need, and yet we don't let people build houses and we distort the market as a council on that. I want us to stop that, and I think the Waitakere Rangers local board had fantastic points around that. I think there are two, I want to stay positive because I think there's two things that we really get right in this. Opposition to the removal of the rub. I think that's an excellent point. We should be strong on that. And again, Waitakere Rangers pointed all this out as well. There's a risk here that if you remove the rural-urban boundary, nothing else matters, right? Because you've seen how the development market operate, is that they will go out and out and out and out and out. They'll find the cheapest land possible, and then they'll externalise those costs onto councils, onto ratepayers. You guys will pay for the pipes and the roads and whatever. Nothing to do with us. We'll just chuck our housing in the middle of nowhere and see how it goes and take our money. We can't allow that. So the rural-urban boundary, I think, is a bulwark against that kind of behaviour as much as possible. But just on that note, the other thing that I think we get really right is out-of-sequence developments. We should not be in a situation where we're trying to crystal ball this stuff. You know, at what point a developer's going to rock in and say, we're going to chuck in a couple of thousand houses in rural areas, out of sequence, council, we're just going to have to deal with it. And apparently that's what the government want us to do, and I don't think that's right. People in the public have an expectation that the people that run the city hold the pen around the planning of that city. And already we have a bit of a debacle in this situation. People need to understand we actually have a very limited ability to stop anything at all here. We've had situations in the past of saying, well, I don't think this is a good idea to do that in rural areas. We should be focusing on central areas in terms of housing. And developers will say, well, I'll see you in court. And then it goes to the Environment Court, they win, there go the houses. What do? We're a democratically elected body, right? And the public expect us to have more power in this, not less. So it's a bit contradictory, my view, to be honest, because I worry here, as I always have, about how we have used the power that we do have to restrict housing. But at the same time, I believe in democracy, and I think the public do too. So I don't know if there were any salient points in that rant, but look, I think I'll support it here, and I'll come back to it when it comes to legislation and kick the tyres a lot harder. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that we have a so-called housing crisis and understand what that means. We certainly do not have a house planning enablement crisis. You know, that the evidence is well firm on that we have provision. We certainly have a house building crisis. You won't get anybody to live in a house plan enablement document. No one will reside there. It'll be pretty cold and heartless. But we certainly have, in terms of a housing infrastructure crisis, that's still live. That's something that the government and ourselves, we're focusing on that, but that's something the government could really focus on. They could really focus on the industry and skilling the industry, training the industry, putting all the things in place that actually construct houses for people to actually live in. This area of work appears like it's going to be some magic bullet, but it will not be. It will not be. You've got hundreds of apartments in the Auckland city area here that are on the market at the moment. Their prices have dropped in value. That goes for many parts of Auckland, actually. Rents have dropped marginally, not as much as the capital, the values or the market values. But I think we should, be pretty blunt and honest to ourselves here that we do not have a planning crisis. We do not have a house planning crisis. We have a house building crisis, if at all. And those responsibilities are not this council's, but they should be the responsibility of a government that should be stimulating the construction sector. And I don't believe it is. That is the problem. And so this notion of housing crisis, I think we've got to be really careful rattling that little phrase off without understanding it. It is not relevant to the work that is being discussed here.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Well, I just think I agree with the two speakers before me. It's complicated, and when I work through and try to listen to what's happening, you seem to get this conflict in the discussion where you say, yeah, this is right, and then all of a sudden this is contrary to what you've just thought is trying to be achieved.
I agree. I think Councillor Darby said it better more eloquent than I could, but I agree with him. And then I find myself sitting here only a couple of weeks later, and it's all changed. You only have to wait 10 minutes, and it's all changed. So I just want to make sure that, like Councillor Henderson, if I say yes to this, that's just to allow some sort of progress to a point of some further input and understanding. It doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with this. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Well, thank you. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next one. Sorry. Where am I? Item 13. Robert's going to